GM. Today we're speaking with Nicole Lazaro, who has been working in game design and development for over 30 years. She's the president and founder of XEODesign, and she happens to be the designer of the first ever iPhone game. In this episode, we dig into Nicole's love for storytelling, her background in cognitive psychology from Stanford, and the things that she discovered over her time working in gaming that really makes users stick and return to a game. She actually developed a framework called the 4 Keys to Fun. I know you're going to love this episode. I would love to hear about your background, what makes you you.
Oh, great. Well, thank you. Lovely to be here today. Very honored to join you today. So, my name, as you said, is Nicole Lazaro, and I'm the president of XEODesign. I, for the past 30 years, have been a veteran of the game industry, doing everything from designing the first iPhone game to being the first person to measure emotion on players' faces while they play. I run XEODesign. It's a design and development company focused on the game industry. And we also do a bit of enterprise as well. And, just basically our mission is to improve quality of life and unlock human potential through play.
What is your personal motivation in general to enter this space?
Well, I became fascinated with games when I co-founded the multimedia studies program at San Francisco State University a long time ago. And when I taught interface design and some coding classes there, I was fascinated with some experiences that we brought in that you just wanted to repeat and play again and again and again. And I was really curious about that motivation. Like, why is it that, one application you would just want to keep consuming, keep interacting with, and then in another application you would click a couple times and then leave. There were obviously usability issues and other things, but there was something really core to some sort of emotional core to the stuff that we wanted to come back to again and again. So for me, it became this, feeling of discovery, the exploration, the feeling of exploration and wonder. And so that's how I actually named my company, XEO, because XEO is this feeling of, the undiscovered country. And I think that games especially do a really great job of creating that for players. And so I got into games because they were voluntary. You would, play them, regardless. And I also saw a lot of really interesting things that games were helping us with, as humans. I have a degree in, psychology from Stanford. And there was this emotional connection, which led me to do my research, on the four keys to fun. And then what I've done ever since is sort of looked at every evolution of technology, as it came, from early, point and click adventures to the iPhone to now what we're entering the, virtual worlds or the metaverse. I go back to the early MMO days and professionally. And the thing that fascinates me most about the metaverse is how disruptive it's going to be, how many new things we're going to be able to do in this world.
I'm really interested in knowing what are the 4 keys.
4 keys to fun, yeah.
4 keys to fun.
Well, I think it's really interesting what's happening with the metaverse and with virtual worlds, in a sense that it's still it's a new experience. It's a whole new experience. And like if you look me up on like TED.com, I have a talk on there are no wimps in the metaverse. So when we talk about a new platform or new virtual worlds, I mean, really, it's a new form of computing. Because I like to say there are no wimps, and by that I mean there are no windows, icons, mice, pointers, or solo play. And there are these new interaction paradigms, and then new value and new things that we're going to be able to do in using these new technologies. But at the core, there's still we're still human, and so so we're still going to be motivated sort of in the same way. We're still going to enjoy interaction in the same way. And with the 4 keys, what we found by measuring emotion on people's faces is that first there's this curiosity. It's a hook that pulls you in. And it's through exploration and role play and, story. But after a while, it's sort of the bubble wrap of game design. But then after a while, you need a little bit more, or players will leave. So games usually offer hard fun, challenge, opportunity for challenge and mastery, and an obstacle and a goal to overcome and strategy to get around it. And that balances emotions of like frustration, to the feeling of winning, like you won the Grand Prix, yes, Fiero, the arms punch the sky. But that feeling of is fleeting. The feeling is feeling, and it's very fleeting. The feeling of winning is fleeting. In fact, you have to be so frustrated in order to feel that, in order to feel like you won. You can't just push a button and win. You have to basically throw the controller through. You'd be so frustrated, you're going to throw the controller through the window. And if you win at that moment, like just before you release the controller, then that's when the arms punch the sky. And then if you add the third key, which is people fun, with cooperation, communication, social play, social interaction, it makes winning is always more fun in the context of friends. It feels more meaningful as well. And there are more emotions in, social interaction than the other three keys combined. And then serious fun kind of comes in and it sort of memorializes the win, because again, that feeling of winning is fleeting. It's really good in the moment, but then the next day you don't feel the same way. It drops down quite quickly. So there are a lot of mechanics in games that help extend that feeling.
Yeah.
And so then when we see all of these mechanics, these action emotion pairs, games have refined them over the years. And now in the metaverse, because we have new interaction paradigms, new ways that new verbs, a new verb space. And so there's going to be some really new things that you can do in the metaverse and access to emotions that we can't even access in games.
I'm wondering, is there something that typically games go wrong, or like some things that always come up again where you think no one really gets it, planning out the emotions of people, for example, when they play a game, or not making it appealing enough?
Yeah, so I think that the thing that would apply the most also to people designing Web3 games, blockchain games, experiences in the metaverse, Roblox or wherever you happen to be, is that one of the more in terms of gamification, a lot of people simplify the appeal of games into points and badges. And while achievements are valuable, it's definitely one valuable tool, but it's not the only thing. And in fact, casual gamers, fewer than 10% of casual game players in our experience actually play for points. They don't care about it. They want other things. Mm-hmm. And so just because your experience might have points in them, it might feel like a game, but it may not have the same appeal for the audience that you're going after. So there can be this mismatch. So in a sense, when you are bringing engagement from or ideas or design constructs from games into another medium, you want to be sure that you'll understand what it is that you're trying to copy. And then also in terms of your audience, who is the audience and what motivates them, and how do they interact? In the more sophisticated thing, when you've got, you often like challenges, like the hard fun and mastery. Probably one of the most common mistakes that designers make is that you need to have this ramp to keep people engaged, right? And you have this balance between difficulty and skill. And so the game needs to get more difficult. If it gets too difficult, they get frustrated, they'll leave. If it's too easy, they'll quit and they'll get bored. The feeling of fear only hits right on that line of frustrating, but not quite frustrating, so much they'll quit. But so how do you do that? How do you continue to do that? And a common mistake that people make is, I'm just going to throw more monsters and less time, give you less time, right? You're just going to make it harder by speeding up the clock or something like that. And what that forgets is strategy. So players really like to have new strategy. So between level to level, between experience to experience, they give you you take away some of the tools that they used to use to that, and you give them a new tool that is more powerful, but then the gameplay is completely different, and now you have to the players have to figure out how that new level works, or how that new world works. It's a big difference if you think about Candy Crush versus Bejeweled. Each level in Candy Crush, for example, that casual game has a bespoke level design that people can that people have to give them new things to master.
I was reading about this very thin line between making people really frustrated and making them have fun.
It's a really good point, because if you play the game in order to collect your little virtual pets or something like that, what makes it appealing to get the next one, the next one, the next one? Just because you have a collection of 40 that you then gradually go through, if there's no strategy, if there's no kind of market forces that you have to master, stuff like that, people will be, it just feels like more of the same, more of the same. So there needs to be strokes on that. And then if you think about a lot of land games, like it could be, when you're buying virtual land, and is that a land it could be, it's trying to be like virtual, like a tycoon, right? A real estate tycoon. But in terms of mechanics, all it is like, well, I buy something and then I have a stock ticker or something like that, a market value thing. That's not a game. That's not a game. You need to have more mechanics, copy more, and really understand what drives some of these really fun real estate kind of games, or territory games are a very popular genre overall. And so bringing more of those kind of mechanics into the metaverse, I think is very important, because otherwise it's just an investment, and you're there's not going to be people there. The other thing that people really, the other big mistake is that they make, and this is not my game clients, but more my metaverse clients. We do a lot more consulting right now in in Web3 and in virtual worlds, and we're making some really fun XR games ourselves. That basically, I'm going to build this big, shopping mall or movie center complex, and then you build it and they will come. But you go in there, there's nothing to do, right? Yeah. So there's definitely the social interaction, and you chat. It's an evergreen kind of thing, but it has to be hosted in the right way for people. So VR chat, of course, succeeds. But the mistake that a lot of people think is like, okay, well, if we build this beautiful world, or I'm a brand, I go into the metaverse and I'm going to build this beautiful store or this beautiful theme park. If there isn't stuff for people to do, and then lots of different you need a lot of different social design or aspects that encourage or frame social interaction, so that people will come and repeat to come, bring their friends, and spend time in these experiences.
When I hosted gatherings in the past, like at my flat, for example, it was always the case that people wouldn't actually be in the living room, where I had put some really nice tables, put the snacks, and just made it look really nice. People usually gather in the kitchen or wherever their host or that most people are. It doesn't depend on the place. It depends on the people that you're with.
There's often a commitment to a living room, like you have to sit down. Where in the kitchen, you're often standing, and so it's like, okay, I could just breeze in and breeze out, and I need to get a drink. And so there's often that. But yeah, people always gather in the kitchen. And the original research I did for the 4 Keys, I did a lot of in-home studies. So I watched people play wherever they played games. So homeschool and work, on the bus, wherever it was, in the dorm. And when they had these social things, they were always, even though the game console was in the other room, there was always this cadre in the in the kitchen hanging out, eating, food and socializing.
You touched on this XR games that you're working on right now.
Oh yeah. So the game I'm working on is called Follow the White Rabbit. It's an XR mystery adventure that you play in your real room. So we have I've been working on a VR version of it, fully enclosed VR. And now we're looking at, an AR, in your real world version of the game. And essentially it's a game about a magician who's been a charlatan all his life, until one day the magic actually works and the rabbit disappears wearing a diamond bracelet. And so now everyone wants to follow the white rabbit. What's really fun about where this came from is that the idea for this came from a experience I had, a while ago when I was traveling overseas. So kind of at the turn of this century, a couple of decades ago, I found myself in Egypt. I was standing on top of a temple, and it was a hot, dry day. I was looking out over the desert, could see my boat on the Nile, in the distance. And I reached down for my canteen to get that last sip of water, but then I had to stop. And I stood in amazement, because there on top of this temple, in the middle of the Egyptian desert, someone had carved a game board. And I thought, wow, 2 people had stood where I stood and thought to pass their time with a game, 2,000 years ago. And I wondered, what would they think of the games we played now? Looking forward into the year 2020, which would be a while in the distance, what kind of games would I want to play, then? And then what kinds of games do I want to make? How would that social, kind of that social interaction, what kinds of experiences? And I thought really deeply about this as I walked back, to my boat on the Nile. And I realized that everything about games would have to change. because we didn't have the tools of the language to describe the experiences I wanted, and we didn't have the business models and everything else. So that's when I really began my life's work of measuring, like really understanding the emotion mechanics of gameplay. So fast forward through the 4 keys, and then fast forward to today, and I'm working on White Rabbit, and with it, what we do, it's this mystery adventure. It's a series of escape rooms that happen around the world, and we bring them to your living room using emotion science and machine learning, and we get to recreate all of the different cities I grew up in as a kid. So I grew up like riding camels, climbing pyramids, exploring fire temples, because my family was stationed in the Mideast when I was small, and I want to recreate that feeling of adventure and wonder, and with my friends that I had when I was a kid, and bring everybody else along. So that's the inspiration for the game. And so it's so we're having a really, really interesting time creating it.
I'm interested in the storytelling side of things. How do you come up with the general concept, and then how do you progress, or how do you come up with new chapters over time?
Yeah, so with White Rabbit, what it is I usually go back to a memory, that I had, being in a specific location. Back in the day, I consulted with Cyan on 3 of the Myst games, the original Myst games. And I love their environmental storytelling approach. That's really amazing. So I really take a seed of like a location of, where I am, a memory. And it is the environment, and then often the stories I told myself as a kid, in that. So it might be, at the foot of the Sphinx, in Egypt. And I remember the Sound and Light show, they do it at sunset, and they have this amazing, like, oh, I'm the Sphinx. And they told the story of Ramses or Tutankhamun or something like that. And you could just hear the temple dancers and their bells. You could, hear the all the different things. What I do is I do that. And then I look for inspirations, of puzzles. So, I have a lot of things like, a lot of things around the studio with, this is a little box that, someone gifted me. This is very, kind of steampunky kind of thing. And, what could happen inside, or, or things like, the Marauders map, from Harry Potter, getting these fun kind of physical interactions, things that you can really interact with physically. I have lots of stuff, lots of stuff. Some of it's most of it's in the other room. But I've got a 1903 stereogram viewer, original kind of stereogram viewer. And then so I look at what are the different kinds of puzzles that I could create from those, from that interaction. If you're what could be like a dial. I look at something and I think, oh wow, that could be a dial, or that could be a sliding panel, and then I could make a physical kind of puzzle out of that. Or I go into, here we are, and we're in this world. What are some of the most cool, how can I make this the most cool thing possible? What are some of the most amazing interactions? And if for people who were able to play the original Follow White Rabbit, we showed it at a lot of festivals and exhibits. There are things that happen in the world that we change. It's an escape room. And so the walls move and things change in the world in a very mind-bending way. So I also look at like, well, if this were, not reality, what could I do in this digital world that I couldn't do it in the real world, and how would that feel magical? And the characters sort of talk to me. I think I've read a number of novelists do this, where the characters sort of have their own personalities, and then they talk to me in my imagination. They have imaginations too, I imagine, but they're not real. But so there's that. And then I think like Edison, and I think Dali, two very different type of artists. They took a lot of naps.
Yes.
And so I'm not necessarily a big napper. I do a little bit, but that moment, the other part of my creative process is that in the morning, I always have a pad of paper and pen and a little like an LED light pen. And so I keep that at my bedside. So when I wake up in the middle of the night or in the morning, I'll keep my eyes closed, and then I will just like imagine there's often something in that moment between sleep and wake that is very freeing for ideas.
I wanted to also find out a little bit about your inspiration, and we've talked about how you get your interaction ideas, for example, but what are other like creative outlets that you have? And for example, in terms of like art, music, movies, what inspires you?
Definitely. Well, I do a lot, especially like when you're designing for, like Metaverse or Web3 or some new platform. You want to look, at the old, like where we came from, but don't be trapped by that. And so I think that's where a lot of people stumble, in the sense that they've taken pancake games, 2D games, and try and push them into 3D VR experiences. And there's definitely lessons to learn, but it'll be like, they kind of often feel like just like wet newspaper on the face, because they're just flat, and like, why be in VR? I'm still just doing this same thing, that I'm pushing a plastic button to zap zombies or something like that. And so what I do is I look at at the old generation, but then I think about, well, what could change? And then, so basically I might here are the things that I really like about, this movie. So some of my favorite movies are like Indiana Jones, and the first movie, I really love that one. Or it might be Ghostbusters, or it might be, I really like, Star Wars or the original Star Trek series. And then I look at, well, what, there's some new, streaming series I really like as well. So these are the points, these are the beats, these are the design, things that people designed on one hand. And then this is what XR can do. So this is what a distributed ledger could do. This is what a virtual world could do. This is what player voxel creation, co-creation could do. The social interaction could do. And then I, kind of mix and match that up, and then see if I can make some interesting connections to then make it. And then that, if I'm leveraging what's really new about the platform, then it feels a lot more in. And that's what we found a lot with White Rabbit, especially like on this, in this XR approach, is that if we pulled stuff in, it kind of felt like a mobile game with a video background, a flat mobile game with a video background. And then it's like, that doesn't feel good. Won't feel good on headset, won't feel good on a device. We want something more. But the more that we kind of looked at that list of like what XR could do and made new connections, the more in feeling it has. The more in-person feeling it. Well, no, the more. Sorry, I was distracted by the dialogue box. So the more in, the more native, the more immersive it feels. And to get the qualities of immersion, there are lots of new parameters on the immersive side that are that are possible. And so we want to see that we want to take advantage of those. And then the other thing that I do very intently, and this goes back to the 4 keys, which is now almost a couple decades old now, is that I look at some of my favorite entertainment experiences. Like, it's about a magician. So here are my favorite magic movies. And then movies about magic. And then I look at like, well, what are the emotions that are part of that? I did this for Tilt World, which is based on the first iPhone game, which I created. Oh, yeah. And so the original game, it was done at a game jam, week after the iPhone came out. And Joe Hewitt and I made a game where we measured the Safari browser, the width of it, so we could tell the difference between portrait and landscape. And then dropping blocks. So green this way, blue this way, right? 1 million downloads. But what I did was I looked first, as I looked at remembering the 4 keys research, what was it about that iPhone that people liked the most? What kind of interactions did they like? And then what kind of emotions? So magic and wonder was a big part of the brand. There was a magician who was doing little fun iPhone, kind of experiences, like, drinking beer from the iPhone and, kind of that sort of thing. Yeah. A long time ago, right? And so how could I connect the interactions that they liked the most that would, in a way that created the emotion? And so that's how I did with the original mechanic it was game, called Tilt, an adventure in 1.5 dimensions type of thing. And then with Tilt World, I expanded on that. But looking at what we do is basically, here are the emotions, and then this is the emotion profile. And then as a game designer, I can't design the emotion directly, but if I give the player a set of levers, interactions that create an emotional response, then have an emotion architecture. So I connect the two together, and then I can create a much more rich experience. And so that's what we did with Silt World, which was the #1 app on the iPad when it released. It was a launch title. And then that's definitely what we're doing with Follow the White Rabbit, in the sense that you can design emotions, obviously, with great, with great storytelling, great acting, visuals. Artists create great emotions just with color. But an interaction designer, a game designer, can also create emotion with the interaction. And so moment-to-moment interaction, moment-to-moment gameplay, you want to thread those really amazing emotions that I most liked on some of my inspirational sources. And, stuff that also just pops up in my head, at 3 a.m. in the morning. So I have a very active imagination. I read a ton of science fiction as a kid. And that, gave me superpowers, I think, as it did a lot of folks, where you can really imagine the future in a lot of ways, because that's what science fiction is. It was all about. And you can imagine a world that's different than what it is now. And so I put a lot of that imagination to work as well.
What's your favorite science fiction book, or what's the biggest inspiration in terms of books that you've read?
There's so many. I really loved a lot of, Ray Bradbury and Asimov, and Dune was really interesting for social mechanics. Dune, Dune. In the sense of it was based, I believe he was stationed as an attaché to a consulate in the Mideast, in the real world. And then he used a lot of that, having grown up in the Mideast for about 5 years, was like, I can recognize a lot of the recontextualized and storified a lot of the forces, the East meets West things were happening, especially at the end of the Second World War, that are actually, echoed in that book, plans within plans within plans. And, there's all kinds of really, really interesting deceptions. But I think my favorite ones, going back to a kid, would be like, the Phantom Tollbooth, the what is the Closet, the Chronicles of Narnia, a lot of these very, very wonderful fantasy things. I like more recent ones like The Golden Compass, his Dark Materials, and the ability just to go and have this really blend. I love this blend of fantasy and real. And so with Pokemon Go, it's the secret world, right? But it's an epic battlefield in a sense. So you're trading and you're battling, you're trying to catch them all. I want to go to a more liminal space, and I want to go bring players in and tell them, an amazing story that's happening in this, in this plane, in this that's hidden in this hidden world. That's all part of your experience.
I used to read loads of science fiction. I was actually obsessed with dragons and birds. So whatever.
Yeah. Anna McCaffrey, amazing.
Yes, exactly.
Here's Anthony. Split Infinity is a great one for metaverse, actually. Yeah, it predates Snow Crash by several decades, I think. The Neuromancer. But yeah, it's about a character named Style, a serf. And there's something called the game. And so he participates in the game. You go down a chute, essentially, and you're launched into almost like Hunger Games kind of thing, into different competitions, and you're sponsored by nobility. And then he falls through to an alternate world that is a mirror world of his own, and meets his other self. And there's magic it's fantasy and magic and more sci-fi on his world. So it's super interesting and very interesting ideas as far as metaverse design. And of course, Ray Bradbury's original story, The Veldt, VELDT, which is essentially a VR cave. It's called the Nursery, and you walk in, and it's projection walls on all 6 sides, and then so you can say African savannah with lions, and then you, being a Ray Bradbury story, you probably know what happens. but yeah, it's super early. I mean, that was I believe in the 50s or early 60s.
Wow.
So.
Wow.
But yeah, you can find out a lot about games. The other one that is really good that people should read more is by Neil Stephenson, a different book. It's called The Diamond Age. And it's about what's called a primer, which is a book, a nanotech book, an interactive book. There's a virtual person who's acting the parts, and it bonds with the owner and teaches and there's a copy got made. So two women, one street urchin and one noble woman, grow up with this book, and and it teaches them different lessons in leadership. And I think that's a much more fascinating view of the metaverse than some of the other more dystopian dystopian stories, because we can use this technology to empower us. And like I said, our mission is all about unlocking human potential through play. And that's a very fascinating read. And if you look at it now, I just read the beginning of it a couple weeks ago, and it's fascinating, that world building in that first chapter. It's so on point and prescient of what happened eventually with VR.
What do you think will be the most prominent trends in gaming and the metaverse space?
Certainly. Well, I think within the next 3 to 5 months, we're going to see a lot of changes. And I go a bit into this in my TED Talk and the keynote at Mobile World Congress, is that generative AI is a very disruptive technology, even more so than 3D headsets and distributed ledgers, in that it is allowing creators, anyone, to be a creator. And then that is unlocking new things. Again, a year ago with the TED Talk, I talked about, there are going to be 2 ways that we could create a planetary. One of the big problems with metaverse design, in a sense, or virtual world design, is how do you create something that is planetary scale? Like, one metaverse is planetary scale. And so you have user created content on one side, and then you have AI on the other. So generative AI is now the thing a year later, where it's going to, it clearly could create, that amount of content. And then it could also potentially create, it's already creating games. Whether or not they're fun right now is a big question, and whether or not they get repetitive. And, another book, Orson Welles, 1984, talks about all of the art is created by machines in his world. And it is a warning against the signs of fascism. It was written, after the war, obviously, but there's all kinds of lessons for that. And so basically having a lot of, centralized control by machines, if machines, kind of control all of the art, all of the human expression that people, experience or interact with, that's very centralized, and has a lot of potential concerns and harm. So generative AI, we've had a lot of success with the, on the arts. We've been looking at it with, at every level of the game design, and it's really sort of 2 kind of camps. So on the small indie team side, it's a superpower. Its ability to, get the ideas out with a much smaller group of people. You can, final experience wise, you can compete with the big fish, as it were, the larger studios with much fewer resources. There are some issues which I can go into with using generative AI in design and in production, and then on the larger studio side, though, there is an internal team issue, because as these tools come on board, that means that certain skill sets will be disrupted and not as necessary, right? Because it will empower. And there's a huge economic incentive, depending on how some of the ethical concerns and copyright issues and legislative, legal issues get resolved. You have the opportunity, though, to of course build even bigger worlds. And what I see in these operas of games, where you've got 80 people, several thousand people working on a game, is that you're going to have this AI that maybe it's not hosted, not a general one that's hosted for everybody, but you might have, when that becomes commodity, when that becomes something that you can just put in a box on your servers, you feed in your entire catalog. You've got a franchise, like Assassin's Creed or Call of Duty, or The Sims, and you train the AI on that franchise. It could spit out additional games, right? It could potentially give you new art, new mechanics, new audio, all of those things. And it may be we sit in a future, sort of 2 things. One, we might have a future world where we have these virtual worlds that are filled with experiences that feel like Assassin's Creed, or that feel like Diner Dash, or feel like, The Sims. They're not as bespoke or tuned as a game, but they're enough to kind of casually interact, and then of course be social. And then there can be a continuous stream of content. So since a lot of games are as a service now, and so the ability to generate content over time is really important. And it's kind of like within casual games, you have a specific level mode. like I've got this level, the challenge mode, and then you have kind of with a timer, and then you have a free play mode where you're just kind of like, in Diner Dash, you're just being a waitress. I worked on like 40 projects for Play First, so I know a lot about that particular series. And you just keep going. I also worked on Star Wars too, but and you just, so you have those two kind of modes. I see that. And then I also see a really interesting world, and I'm not sure what happens exactly in terms of who the players are, but just following the trend, reading the tea leaves, which I'm pretty good at, is that I see this world where there are, in a sense, like 3 servers in the sky. And of course, they're actually on land, and, but cloud servers. And instead of it being like this boxed approach that the current publishers have, it's still like, here is an app, or here is this is a game. You will have these servers, going back to like Ray Bradbury's The Veldt, where you as the player can go in and have an entertainment experience just by creating it yourself. There will be stuff that other folks create, but there will also be this interactive fantasy worlds that you can role play and have fun in the way, taking all the lessons from the virtual worlds that we did, in the 90s, what created engagement, then apply a bit of that. But I see that as a real disruptive thing and potential pivot point for the established publishers. There's been massive consolidation, as you know, across the game industry, and so what might, I'm not sure if it replaces them or they become part of that. I think that is going to be a really interesting outcome and a challenge for a lot of folks. And then, there are, the people that are going to build those game services. So then are we going to need an engine like Unreal or Unity, or are those going to be up in the sky? Or is this platform, this very generative AI inspired platform, going to be something that, small company right now that is, just getting started on? And we don't know, but I think there's a huge opportunity there. I gave a talk at GDC in 2019 on red pill versus blue pill, how do you build a narrative AI? At that moment, we had just gotten the GANs networks had just come out with the ability, and the internet was covered with faces of non-real people who didn't actually exist but looked real. People were like, oh my gosh, what's happened? So in that talk, I talk about the most disruptive thing that GANs networks would do, or AI would do, is be the GM, so that we could get a GM, and then what would those layers look like?
If you could pick one superpower, which one would it be?
Oh, one that I don't already have? Well, I think that the one that I'm most attached to is the ability to sort of see or feel where the future is going, right? This is where we are now, and then what is it going, how can I, what is the trend line? That helps with, that would help with creativity and that sort of thing. Probably the better pick, if I had a better pick, would be the ability to, generate really strong positive emotions, especially, or the emotions that someone really needs right now, and be able to and then have them go through an emotional sequence that kind of like a chiropractor gets them all straight and level again. And I say that because it's not just that you want to take a pill and feel good. You often have to psychologically go through and work stuff out. And again, you have to feel very frustrated in order to feel accomplishment. So I would want to be able to do that. Maybe, and definitely not through a pill. I don't like that sort of approach, but I like it through a game mechanic. So the ability for me to design a game mechanic that, helps heal people. That would be my superpower. That's actually a bit about what White Rabbit's about, in a sense, because we're giving you the social interaction, with the 4 keys, the third key, people fun. More emotion in that than the other 3 keys combined. And then it's the emotions that really help social bonding. So a lot of the multiplayer interactions are all about, really about ways of celebrating friendship and making it stickier, and, experiences to talk about later, which is something that we get from the best movies and best books and, kind of best experiences with our friends.
On that note, thank you so much for joining us for the podcast.
Awesome. Well, likewise, I had a really fun time talking with you today as well.
I hope you liked our chat, and I would love to hear your thoughts. Go over to Twitter and DM me there. Cheers.